I'm Chris Riddell. I'm an illustrator, and one of my favourite things to illustrate is poetry. I love the look of words on a page, and I enjoy actually the way that stanzas, verses of different shapes and sizes can be laid out on the pages of a book and maybe give one a sense of how one might read a poem. I want to illuminate rather than explain when I illustrate poetry. Often when I read poems, an image will leap out that seems to capture an essence or an intention within the poem. And just by focusing in on maybe one particular thought or idea, the poem seems to sort of coalesce around it. And as an illustrator, I find that extremely enjoyable. Sometimes I can work with a soft pencil. I often use a Conte pastel pencil to draw with because it gives a soft and yet definite line. It's slightly dark, and it has the density of charcoal. At the same time, it has the lightness of graphite. So it's a very useful thing to use when illustrating something as delicate in some senses as poetry. I sharpen my Conte pencils to an impressively sharp point, which I feel is a skill in and of itself. And once the pencil is sharp, I then lay down the sort of poem on a sheet of paper beside me and draw as I read the poetry and allow, in a sense, the feel of the poem to inform what I'm actually drawing. And quite often when I start, I'm not necessarily thinking of anything definitive, but usually by the end of the process, I've arrived at something that seems to complement the poem. I think in some senses that's what poetry can do in one's mind's eye. Words are powerful, and in the hands of poets, they can move us and change our thoughts about things and invite empathy, I think, in a way that almost no other form manages in such a powerful way. I've chosen 3 poems from the Foyles Young Poets of the Year competition from 2019. With Nadia Lyne's poem Explaining Memes to Keats, I found myself drawing a spectral figure, a figure possibly of Keats himself in a funereal shroud. Always lots to engage with the folds of fabric and using the spectral quality is really nice in terms of shading and a figure coming out of the gloom, as it were. I love the way in which a very modern idiom accessed by a mobile phone confronts one of the great romantic poets. And the image I found myself drawing as I read Nadia's poem was of the poet examining a mobile phone with some incomprehension, and it allowed me to really enjoy the creases and the folds of his shroud. Nadia Lynes, Explaining Memes to Keats. So you see, I say slowly, it's a little engine of remembering, recalling, reverberating in the mind like rhyme. So it can never die, he replies. I avert my eyes. It will. with time. In his poem, The Drowning of Li Po, Thomas Frost has used one of Ezra Pound's epitaphs and has written a wonderfully dark poem with, I think, a comic edge to it. And as I illustrated this poem, the image of the moon shimmering on the water was obviously the focal point. And I want to try and capture some of the suicidal exuberance of the poet throwing himself into this miasmic vision, just about to hit the water and disappear beneath it in that wonderful dark finish that Thomas Frost gives to the poem. Again, sometimes with the precision of poetry, it's nice to use exuberance and movement and brevity in the way that one draws as a counterpoint. So you have the precision of the words and the sort of luminous quality of the imagery, and then a drawing that is effortless and quick and doesn't feel overthought. One of the things I really enjoy about poetry and illustrating poetry is not over-decorating. Thomas Frost, The Drowning of Li Po. And Li Po also died drunk. He tried to embrace a moon in the Yellow River. Ezra Pound, Epitaphs. The river is drunk, reeling. It tosses the sad poet's prow to the white moon, which bathes gently in the dark water of heaven. The moon, enraged by this sot's trespass, casts his prow down again to the dark water, where its white image sways whore-like, grinning. The poet, likewise grinning, leaps forth into the dark water and cries, choking his hallelujah. When I read Donna Collins' poem My Mother with 8 chemo sessions to go, I was really struck by obviously the subject matter of the poem. Very personal and heartrending, and yet there is a sort of quality of stillness, I think, at the heart of the poem, as the subject of the poem, the mother, cleans around the figure sitting in the chair. The figure can't move. The voice of the poem is stuck in this chair with a feeling of both, emotional and physical paralysis. I wanted to capture that stillness and that sense of this is a poem about a thought, and a poem about regret and guilt and the inability to change what is happening. And yet at the same time, the poem is in itself a cathartic poem, something that gives insight and understanding and makes us feel the pain at its heart. So the back of a chair with a disembodied hand, the occupant of the chair sitting almost enveloped by the heft of the chair, contemplating something we don't actually see, contemplating, I think, the sentiment of the poem. Donna Collins, My Mother with 8 chemo sessions to go. There's a green chair that sits in my living room. I'm pretty sure that it stands taller and older than me, For years it's housed the bodies of my family and friends, and it still smells like the wet fur of our first dog. I've never felt more ashamed than when sitting on that chair as my mother, a woman who stands like a gnarled oak tree, attacked the living room with a feather duster. My mother, 5 weeks into chemotherapy, carried the vacuum cleaner, scrubbed the floors, wiped away grime from the shelves. My mother, 5 feet 4 inches tall, climbed the furniture to swipe at the ceiling. "This is why you have to do it every week," she told me, with laboured breath and sweat pooling on her forehead, gesturing to the clumps of dust under the sofa that resembled her falling out hair. "Because," she said, "the dog will leave hair everywhere." And it was with a grimace that I realised my mother would soon be like the dog, hair falling from her scalp like dandruff. I made a joke about selling the dog, buying a hairless one. "It'll make less of a mess," I said with an easy smile. But it wasn't easy, or light, or fine, because I stayed in that green chair while my mother cleaned. My mother, who had spent the week before bedbound, ashamed of her own sickness. My mother, who threw up quietly into the toilet bowl so she wouldn't alarm her children. She bumbled around the living room, vacuum following her like a dark cloud. She hauled the furniture around the room, picking up all our mess. I watched her toiling away and did nothing. I saw her breaking her body more than it was already broken for her family, and stayed silent. I don't know why I didn't offer myself up for her. All I knew was that admitting she needed my help was admitting she was sick. The woman who taught me independence needed me, and I was too scared to give myself away.